welcome to the Snowy's camping show with Ben and Lauren. Hey, Ben.
Howdy. How you going?
Good. How are you?
Well, thank you.
Good. So we are going to whip a question out of our little chalice of magic today, but don't forget to subscribe wherever you're listening to your podcast, whether that be on YouTube or your favorite podcast app. So we have the option, or we don't have an option really, but in this little chalice of magic, we get put a bunch of questions.
Chalice of magic.
Yeah, I don't know. I just pulled that out today. Questions are submitted to us by our staff, both in our customer support and store, for commonly asked customer questions. But we also put in a couple of questions that we get from listeners as well who submit them. If your question is pulled out and that's what we use on our podcast for the topic, we will send you a free sticker and stubby holder in the post, which I think is a pretty sweet deal.
Send you through it. We won't charge you
Just
for it.
Just ask us a question that we've never answered before and you get a free stubby holder and sticker.
These are the best stubby holders.
They're actually very cool.
Very
and
special.
also probably worth mentioning that we don't sell them.
Yes, we do.
Do we sell them on our website?
Yeah, they're on the website.
Are they?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, well, scratch that. Can you edit that one out, please, Larry? That is embarrassing. I didn't know we sold them.
Yeah, we do.
There you go.
I haven't done it. It's on my list to do a product review video on them for all their uses.
I really don't think you need to do a product review.
I've got a whole list of uses for this.
Do you really?
I do.
Well, I've pulled a question out, so I want to know what it says in a minute. But
there's a little Easter egg in these as well.
Yeah, there is. But the stickers, we don't sell these on our website.
No,
these bad boys.
No.
Get one to stick across your forehead.
Or your bumper, as you wish. Anyway, none to give away today. We've given away one so far. But yeah, let us know your questions.
We don't have any more listener submitted questions in here. So
is it empty?
Get submitting. There's just this one more that I put in there the other day from Q&As.
Okay, let's do this.
Let's do this.
What's the question? So this is not from a customer. This is from our experience or our customer service department.
Yeah, this is one of the common. Actually, this is a common question as well. I feel like every time I pull a question out, I'm like, I got asked this week. So obviously we're on the right track.
Yep.
What tents are wind resistant?
Ooh, I guess, yeah. So define
none,
wind resistant,
and
all of them. Yeah.
What is wind resistant? So I guess from the context of my role at Snowy's, when a customer asks what tents are wind resistant, they're asking what tent can I put up and it cop horrific wind and not be affected in any way, shape or form.
Yeah, so I guess there's different levels of wind resistance.
So the answer to that is none.
So, well, yeah, pretty much. A mesh dome isn't going to be wind resistant, but you then put a fly over the top, that suddenly becomes wind resistant to a degree. And at some point, that's going to blow over unless you apply.
So 2 ways to take this. 1, wind resistance in terms of structural integrity.
Mm-hmm.
2, wind resistance in terms of I'm sitting inside it, will I feel the wind?
Should we cover both of those?
Yeah, let's
cover the second of those first because that's a pretty easy one.
Okay.
If you have a mesh dome and nothing over the top, you will feel the wind inside. Start with the very basics. If you have a mesh dome and throw a fly over the top, you will still feel a little bit of breeze because that wind's going to come in under the fly and hit the mesh. Which
is, realistically, it's what you want because that's what also helps regulate the internal and external temperature and manages condensation.
Absolutely.
So ventilation is really important.
Yep. If you need that ventilation with a fly over the top but want to reduce the wind that's coming in underneath, then this is more sort of prominent in hiking tents.
Mm-hmm.
You'll get tents that have kind of a solid polyester fabric or panels to about halfway up and then mesh on the top. So that then cuts out that wind that's coming in underneath so that while you're lying down, you're not getting breeze over the top of you, but you still get wind over the top.
Yeah.
And then that's wind resistance in terms of that will I feel wind inside. Mm-hmm. If you want to cut it out completely, get a full solid polyester inner, but going back to your comment.
Going back to my comment.
What's your condensation?
If you're wondering about wind resistance in terms of if I'm lying in bed and it's a storm, will my tent flap about and move around? 100% yes.
They all will.
There's not a tent on the market that will not move. In that particular situation, if you want something that doesn't make noise, you want a pergola with walls.
But even a house
basically
makes
yeah, you're right. Even a house is just, from that perspective, there's nothing we've got for you. In terms of structural integrity, to a certain extent, the answer is also no. Like, there's not very many tents that come with an official wind rating. So tents will very commonly have a Waterhead rating, right? Because the material is tested for its hydrophobia or whatever the word is called. I don't know if I made it up. We've talked about that in Waterhead ratings episode before. There's not very many brands that do a official wind rating testing. And also I should probably go back to the Waterhead rating testing to say that's like a universal standard, right? It's the same sort of set of principles that work through, so that if a Waterhead rating physically is being stated on a product, generally that means it's been tested according to the standard. Similar thing with your R value rating on sleeping mats or your temperature comfort ratings on sleeping bags, right? They're testing standards.
Tents do get tested in a wind tunnel.
Not all of them, though.
Not all of them. Some do, but even that.
And it's not an official testing standard either that I'm aware of it.
You'll see claims, even gazebos will say tested in up to whatever kilometre per hour winds. There's so many variables for that, and even it's quite important for expedition style tents that they can withstand wind, and they usually have a lot more pole structure to do that, and they'll be tested up to certain sort of wind conditions, I suppose. They're flapping around like you wouldn't believe at that point, but they're still offering shelter.
I was going to actually say expedition level, like hiking tents or expedition tents designed for alpine or above snow level will often have a wind rating.
Yeah.
But that's because of the intended use of the tent. It's an important element to it.
And you got to remember those wind tunnels too, is literally the tent set up with the wind blowing in one direction at the tent, and they're probably anchored really well to the ground. We'll get onto the other considerations with this shortly. And then the wind is increased. But if it's swirling wind or storms and gusty and that sort of thing, then, there's always a what if, and you need to apply some common sense to the situation that you're in.
We talk about a lot in the past, if you've been listening to us for a while, we've talked a lot about air tents, specifically the Empire ones being good in windy weather. That is true. Purely from the physics of the tent frame, right? It's a fluid frame. It's when it's inflated to a PSI where it's hard as a rock, but it does allow some natural bend and movement, like a reed next to a pond in the breeze, right? It's not going to touch the ground and spring back up like one of those blowy airmans outside of a carpet shop on sale. It's not like that sort of situation, but in that sense, there is some ability within the tent for movement that allows it to withstand windy conditions a lot better than if it's a rigid frame structure.
Yep, and they just pop back into place rather than bend up.
Yeah, or fold or snap or invert in a knuckle position.
Yep.
It's interesting because we have some tents in our range where I would unequivocally say not ideal for coastal camping, not ideal for prevailing winds, not ideal for really any serious inclement weather. But then I have seen those same tents from some campers with videos in the most ridiculous storms, and the tent is fine because they've managed it well. And I know that one of our very, very, very early on episodes, I think maybe even single digit episode numbers, was managing wind and rain when camping. So we went through a lot of specific details on how to actually set your tent up and what you need in your kit for those sorts of situations. But I think it's in terms of does this tent have a 60 kilometre wind resistance, and then you buy that tent and you take it and you expect that that's what's going to occur. It's not necessarily the case because they don't really come with those wind resistant ratings.
There are claims on there.
There are claims, but I think also it's one of those things like back with the darkroom coating, right? This claim that it's going to reduce temperatures by up to 10%, like it's impossible to say that, you know. There are so many variables that go into that, but it just gives you a bit of a guide or a bit of an idea.
Yep. Throw some, we'll get onto anchors and stuff shortly, but throw some common sense into play. If you've got a boxy tent, big flat sides, that's going to catch the wind far more than something that is rounded like a dome tent. So a dome or a sloped tent is going to be better. You're going to have, I guess, in the context of what we're talking about here, going to have better wind resistance than a boxy tent. You then want to take fabric type into consideration. Boxy tent can still be quite wind resistant. So I use the likes of a turbo tent or a Oztent RV tent. I've got an Oztent RV tent and I've had it in horrific winds.
Yeah.
Pegged out correctly because I know it's got big flat sides, and if I try and set the slope side up towards the incoming winds, but if that switches over the night and it comes in on the side, I need to consider that I need to have that well anchored out, knowing that the fabric is strong enough to hold it. But lighter weight fabrics, and I talk about, say, some of the like the instant up tents that are a good balance of functions and feature and weight. Those big boxy sides on the side aren't going to have quite the same strength as heavy canvas.
Yeah.
So you then need to consider that not being as wind resistant as the similar design in a heavier fabric.
Yeah. And of course you've got things like your guy ropes. They're looped through fabric loops that are stitched into the material, and eyelets and things. Like you say, with that common sense, I mean, everybody wants to have a tent that is going to keep them protected in the weather. But it's also understanding the limitations of that as well. And it's like if you've got, a great, like you say, it's affordable. It's got a good balance of sort of pack size, weight, functionality, that sort of thing. And then you're setting it up and you've got prevailing winds. And even if you've got guy ropes out, it's going to most likely be possible, especially if it's in a synthetic tent, it's going to be possible that over time you might end up with some of those guy rope points ripping out and things like that. So it's just, again, I know sometimes a lot on this podcast we say, oh, it's just a bit of common sense, but it's also just about being aware of that, the limitation of your tents. And when it comes to things like stitching, ripping on a guy rope point, for example, that's where those trace springs can come in really handy because it reduces the amount of stress and tension on that stitch point, and it sort of absorbs it a bit in the rope and in the spring connection between the peg, which I guess is the similar premise of the air tents, right? It's that absorption of the friction and the movement of the wind through the air pole. That's sort of what you're getting with the trace springs.
So not everyone's going to need to get something with heavy duty guy ropes attached. You know, some of the air tents in particular have 2 attachment points. So the weight is kind of shared with 2 different spots on the tent.
Yeah.
Not everyone's going to need to have something that's really heavily duty stitched to the tent. If you're just a caravan park camper, mild weather, you don't need to go all out on super heavy duty guy ropes. But if you're expecting your tent to stand up for a week's worth of camping on the beach in heavy winds, then you need to consider those guy ropes, not just putting the guy ropes out, but how well are they attached to my tent and are the fabric strong enough? Yeah.
You also have the consideration of the frame structure as well. There is a difference in the sense that for example, we were talking about Black Wolf turbo tents before, right? They've got that, they're made from, obviously they've got a light version and they've got a standard version. The standard version is a canvas. It's a very heavy duty material, but it's the same premise as something like your Oztrail Lumos or your Coleman North Star sort of instant up style tents as well. They're more of a synthetic version, right? So it's not just the material and the difference between those tents, but it also comes down to the frame size as well. So there is a bit of a sacrifice, I guess, in an instant up style tent because they want to make something that's still portable, that can still be moved, that still packs down to fit in a person's car, but they want the frame to be engineered with the convenience of that instant up hub. So the sacrifice of that sometimes can be the thickness of the poles and the strengths of the knuckles and things like that. So then when you're looking at something like like a Black Wolf Turbo tent, you'll find that the poles tend to be a thicker gauge. I think they're like a good 0.5 centimetre thicker in diameter. And the hubs and the knuckles on those are all cast aluminium or cast steel. I can't remember what the actual alloy. Yeah. Fully replaceable componentry, all of that stuff. But that's designed, even though it isn't still an instant up tent, it's designed to take a little bit more of a beating just purely by the nature of the frame than something like your Coleman or your Austrail tents, which, as I've said, are still really great. And I have seen people go through storms set up properly with the correct support for their tent. But if you're looking at, I want to go camping on the coast for a week long at a time and I'm going to be dealing with prevailing winds for a few hours every afternoon, you have to look at that frame and go, well, how much stress am I putting on this frame realistically with as much support as I can give it? And is it fair to expect that level of performance from something like this? And whether or not another option like your Black Wolf Turbo tent, for example, or like your Oztent RVs or something is going to be a better option.
Yeah. It depends on how often you camp, where you camp. Either way you go, if you get a really heavy duty tent, it's going to be too much for a caravan park. If you get something for a caravan park, you probably need to put some considerations into place for a heavy duty situation or a high wind situation. So no right or wrong, just considerations to make. But it's probably a good segue now into, and I'm pretty sure we've done a podcast on this before as well, but making sure you've actually anchored your tent, like tent pegs, the right tent pegs, the right guy ropes, because you can use the lightweight pegs that come with a tent and peg it out in the sand and say, I used them all. The wind comes along, the pegs pull out and you
tent rolls off down the beach.
So,
which we have heard of before, unfortunately.
So this, I've got, remember I was in, what's a French name? I can't think of the name of the national park over in WA once camping. And we actually packed up after the first night and left because the wind was getting worse. But I had my Oztent RV with orange guy ropes all around, just pegged out to the nines. I had extra guy ropes all over. I think
I've seen a photo of that actually.
Have you?
Yeah.
With me standing quite proud next to it.
Yeah.
Now I did that because I knew it was windy and I knew my kids didn't like flapping fabric. So I'm trying to stop the fabric flapping as much as I can, but to no success. Can we just go, Daddy? It's really windy. So I did that with the right pegs because I knew it was going to be windy. I had to make those considerations. But when I put the extra poles, extra guy ropes in, I'm not just attaching them to the existing guy rope points. Where I can, I'm actually wrapping it around the frame as well. So you can have a tie point where I loop it over the top of an awning pole and then wrap it around the pole and then peg it out. So the tension goes to the frame. So you're removing some of the tension.
I can't believe it, but I've never heard of that before, and that's genius because a lot of the time you have feedback from customers that maybe an eyelet has pulled out because the awning's been flapping around so much and it's torn the eyelet out. But this is
a really simple one.
A really simple way to address that.
Yeah. It also stops in the instance of flapping, and this is increasing the windproofness of your tent.
Yeah.
If that is flapping around, you've got your spigot on the top of your pole.
Yeah.
That sometimes it'll flap enough that pole will come out. If you put the guy rope over the top of that and then wrap it around the pole underneath and tighten it down, it holds the tarp on top of the spigot.
Yeah, right.
I have to put a diagram up to show what I'm talking about here. It's just little things like that. And this is common sense and a little bit of knowledge, I suppose, coming into play to make sure you're doing what you can to increase the amount of wind that your tent is able to handle.
Yeah.
So by doing that, I was able to leave all the awning poles up so I could then put a sidewall up to give us more protection.
Yeah.
But I had these guy ropes wrapped around
the
actual frame wherever I could to make it more secure.
You've also got things like Tarp-Buddies as well, which I think is that a super peg Tarp-Buddies?
I think
maybe
super
it's
peg.
just
I think
like
Australia do some as well.
It's like a little
elastic
collar.
on a
No, not those ones. They're like a little stainless steel collar that slips over the top of your spigot after it's gone through the awning, and then you tighten it with a wing nut, and that locks your
stops it coming off.
Locks your awning material down
so
too.
That's just another little step to windproof it because if a pole comes out, then you've got a lot of fabric flapping around, and then it can get worse from there. So, And pegs, we won't go into detail on pegs now.
We've done an episode on pegs before as well.
If you're in sand, get a sand peg.
Yeah.
If you're in soft ground, get bigger pegs. Just use the right peg for the situation.
Yeah.
So to summarize, they're not, are they wind resistant? Yes and no. You can, if you want to protect yourself inside, you need to get different levels of solid fabric for the inner and the outer tent to cut the wind getting inside. But more so, I think people are referring to, how can it handle the wind? Within reason, any tent can handle any wind if you've taken consideration and pegged it out accordingly and used the right pegs. But you need to apply some common sense at some stage with some tents. You might need to just take it down and go home.
Yeah.
But the thicker the frame, the heavier duty the frame, the thicker the fabric, the heavier the tent's going to be, but the more wind resistance it's going to be. If you're getting a compact little tent that fits easily in the back of a hatchback, it's going to be easy to set up and easy to transport. It's not going to have the same wind resistance just because it's made with lighter weight fabrics with lighter weight frames. And they probably haven't got all the extra reinforcements for the guy ropes in the fabric. That'd be my summary.
Cool. I think that's about it.
Yep. We didn't really research that one beforehand. We don't really research anything
Don't
beforehand.
really research anything, especially these questions.
Yeah. That's the sort of answer you get if you called and spoke to you on the phone.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Hopefully not as long,
Let me just start at the start and work this out as I go.
Basically. Anyway,
thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Snowy's Camping Show. We will see you again next week.
See you next time.
Catch you later.